I'm 47, divorced for a little over a year now, and still trying to figure out what life is supposed to look like after spending 2 decades married to a man who slowly made me feel invisible. I'd like to think I've handled the breakup better than most, but I'll admit, when my 22-year-old daughter told me she wanted to move in with her dad for a while, it felt like a slap in the face. At first, she said it was temporary. She wanted to reconnect with him, said she missed the old dynamic they had when she was younger. I didn't argue. I figured if she needed that, I should support her. But deep down, it stung. We'd always been close, through her awkward high school years, the breakup with her first boyfriend, even her college application meltdown at 2 a.m. I was always the one she called, so when she told me she wanted to move in with her dad, it wasn't just a move, it was a shift, a quiet one that told me something had changed between us, and I wasn't sure how or why. She didn't take much with her, just a couple suitcases and her laptop, but the way she left made it feel final. She didn't hug me tight or cry like I half expected. She just said she'd call me later, and then she didn't. Not that day, not the next. A full week passed before I heard her voice again, and even then, the call was short, robotic, like she was reading from a script. I asked her how she was settling in. She said things were fine. I asked what she and her dad had been up to, and she said, just catching up. I asked if she wanted to meet for coffee soon. She paused for a long time before saying she was too busy. Too busy for 20 minutes of coffee with her mother? It didn't sit right, didn't press. I just told her I loved her, and she said it back, but it sounded off, detached, like it was something she had to say, not something she felt. Then that night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling for hours. My ex-husband and I split because of emotional neglect, among other things. The cheating didn't come out until later, but the real wound was how expertly he made me feel unimportant. Like I was just a shadow passing through his day. He never hit me, never yelled. He just made sure I stopped mattering. And now, somehow, he had my daughter in his orbit again, and something about it felt wrong. I couldn't explain it. Just this heaviness in my gut. And then came the moment that flipped everything upside down. 2 weeks after she moved in, I got a notification on my Venmo. My daughter had accidentally sent me $30 with a note attached. For the lockbox, don't forget to hide it. Hide what? I texted her instantly. No reply. So I logged into Venmo to double-check the message. It was gone. Deleted. She must have realized what she did and erased it. But it was too late. I'd already seen it, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. After the Venmo message, I waited for my daughter to text me back. An hour passed, then 2. By midnight, I gave up and tried calling her, straight to voicemail. She'd never ignored me like that before, not even during her worst teenage moods. I didn't want to overreact, but the silence was starting to feel pointed, like she was trying to shut me out. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept picturing the words. For the lockbox. Don't forget to hide it. What was she hiding, and why did it need to be hidden from me? The next morning, I did what I promised myself I wouldn't do. I drove to my ex-husband's house. It had been almost a year since I'd last seen the place. He'd kept it after the divorce, though not without. I used to call it our home, back when I still believed we had a life worth. Now, I wasn't even sure what was behind those walls anymore. I didn't plan to know. I just wanted to see if her car was there. It wasn't, but his was. That wouldn't be strange, except it was a Wednesday. My ex was never home on weekdays before 6 p.m. His job was demanding, and he lived by the clock, unless something had changed. I sat in the car for a few more minutes, debating whether to just go up and knock. I didn't want to make things worse, but I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Then, just as I was about to pull away, I saw the blinds shift upstairs. Someone was watching me, and not just peeking. They were standing there still, like they were waiting for me to leave. I didn't. I stepped out of my car and walked slowly toward the front door. No one opened it. No one called out. I rang the bell once, waited, then twice. Still nothing. I took a deep breath, looked straight into the ring camera by the door, and said I just wanted to talk to my daughter, that I wasn't here to fight, that I missed her. No response. I stood there for a while longer, hoping she'd come to the window or open the door, but no one ever did. By the time I got back into my car, my hands were shaking. When I got home, I tried calling her again. This time it rang, but no one picked. I left a voicemail, trying not to sound her. I was worried that I didn't understand what was going on, that I needed to hear from her. And then, finally, an hour later, I got a text. Just 3 words. Please stop calling. No punctuation, no emotion, just a command. I stared at the screen, rereading it over and over, hoping it would change, that maybe I'd misread the tone. It was crystal clear. She didn't even want. I couldn't eat, I pulled out every photo I had of her growing up. Her 4th birthday, dressed as a pirate. Her middle school graduation, smiling. Prom night, nervously adjusting her corsage. Every one of them. What had I done? What had he told her? And why was she acting like I was the enemy? The next day, I tried reaching out to one of her college friends. They used to be inseparable. I figured maybe she'd know what was going on. But when I messaged her on Instagram, I saw the dreaded notification. User not found. Blocked. I tried another friend. Same thing. And that's when it hit me. She hadn't just moved out. She was cutting me off, systematically, silently, and I had no idea why. But whatever it was coming from his house, and I was done waiting on the outside. By the end of that week, I had officially become a ghost in my own daughter's life. No texts, no calls. Her social media accounts were wiped clean, or blocked. Even relatives started noticing her absence. My sister messaged me asking if everything was okay because my daughter had missed their usual FaceTime catch-up. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to lie, but how do you explain that your daughter is suddenly unreachable and seems to have vanished into the walls of her father's house? I told her I'd check in, which was a joke, really, because I'd already tried. The silence wasn't just concerning anymore. It was beginning to feel sinister. I couldn't stop thinking about the Venmo message. For the lockbox. Don't forget to hide it. It wasn't just the secrecy that bothered me. It was the fact that she sent it to me, of all people. Why? Was it an accident? Or a cry for help? I decided to start looking closer. There was one place I hadn't checked. My daughter's old laptop. She left it at my house after moving out, claiming she didn't need it anymore because she was going minimalist. At the time, I didn't think anything of it. But now, I wondered if she left it behind on purpose. The laptop was password protected, but she'd used the same combination for years. Her old hamster's name and her birth year. I tried it. It worked. At first, everything looked normal. Random homework files, photos, Spotify playlists, notes from old essays. But then I checked her email. Most of it was junk, but buried in her sent folder was a chain of messages between her and her father. Ones she'd never mentioned to me. They'd been talking for months before she moved in with him. And not just talking. There were plans, lists, references to something called Phase 1, and timeline adjustments. One email subject line read, "Don't forget the burner account." Burner account? That stopped me cold. I clicked the email. The body was just a single sentence. "If she starts getting suspicious, wipe everything. Don't give her any more access." My heart dropped. If she starts getting suspicious. That was me. They were talking about me. It didn't make sense. Why would they be planning anything behind my back? What were they hiding? I kept digging, found a Google Drive link in another email. It was dead, deleted, but I recognized the folder name, Project Lyra. I had never heard that word in my life. Lyra. It sounded like a company, or maybe a code name. Either way, it felt off, not like something a father and daughter should be plotting together. I felt like I'd just discovered a different language in my own child's mouth. I tried opening her notes app next, looking for anything unsent. That's when I found something terrifying. A checklist, titled simply, "When Mom Finds Out." It had 5 bullet points. Only 3 had been checked off. Slowly reduce contact. Move everything out of storage. Secure lockbox. Final script draft. Submit paperwork. I stared at that list for a long time. Script? Paperwork? What were they planning? What was happening? I closed the laptop and just sat there in silence. Whatever they were doing, it was calculated, planned, and I was clearly not meant to find out about it. But now I had. And if I was already considered a threat in their plan, I had no idea what came next. The next morning, I drove back to his house. I didn't care how it looked. I didn't care if I was overstepping. My daughter was in that house. Something was clearly going on, and I wasn't going to sit back while they erased me from her life like I never existed. I didn't ring the bell this time. I knocked, firm, loud, repeated. No answer, but I saw movement again, just like before. Upstairs, the same window, a shadow pacing behind the curtain. I raised my voice and called out her name, not yelling, just enough that they'd hear. I said I needed to speak to her, just her, that I wouldn't come inside. I just needed to see her face. I waited, I begged. I stood there for 5 full minutes under the sun, refusing to leave. Eventually, the door opened, but it wasn't her. It was him, my ex. He looked calm, too calm. That's when I realized something had changed. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even trying to be polite. He was completely, terrifyingly indifferent. He said she wasn't home, claimed she'd gone out for groceries. I asked when she'd be back. He shrugged, said she was an adult, comes and goes as she pleases. I told him I needed to talk to her, that I was worried, that she wasn't responding to anyone in the family. I asked if she was okay. He smiled, barely, and said she was better than ever. Then, without another word, he started closing the door. But just before it shut, I heard it, a sound from upstairs, something sharp, metal against wood, a clink, like a lock being secured. It came from the guest bedroom, the one that used to be our daughter's when she was little. I stepped forward before the door could close all the way, but he blocked it with his body. Calm voice, steady eyes. He told me I was trespassing, that if I didn't leave, he'd call the cops. And I saw it then, a flicker in his expression, control. He wasn't just trying to keep me out. He wanted me to react. He wanted to see if I'd snap, give him a reason to paint me as unstable, emotional, hysterical, so I didn't give him one. I smiled. I thanked him for his time, and I left. But not before I took a photo of the front of the house, time-stamped, GPS tagged, just in case I needed to prove I'd been there. And as I drove away, I started listing out everything I knew. There was a lockbox, a burner account, a deleted Google Drive folder called Project Lyra, a checklist about cutting me off, and now possibly a room upstairs that had just been locked while I stood on the porch, and no one was answering my questions. I pulled over at the next gas station and opened my notes app. I started documenting everything, every date, every weird message, every silence. I saved screenshots, emails, time logs, anything that felt off, because if I was being paranoid, fine, let the record show it. But if I wasn't, then I needed to be ready for whatever came next. And something was definitely coming, because later that night, I got a letter in the mail, not from him, not from her, from a lawyer, and the subject line, cease and desist, harassment and trespassing notice. The letter was simple, 2 pages, no emotion, no explanation, just legal jargon that boiled down to one thing: stay away. It claimed I'd shown unwarranted aggression by appearing at the property multiple times, that my daughter, my own daughter, was feeling threatened by my attempts to contact, that any further visits, messages, or invasions of privacy would result in immediate legal action. It was signed by a family lawyer, not his, hers. That was the part that crushed me. It wasn't that he was trying to silence me. I expected that. He'd always found ways to make himself look like the calm, reasonable, while pushing me to the edge. She had to know what this letter meant, what it would do to me, and still, she'd gone along with it, maybe even asked for it. There was one line that stuck with me more than the. It read, "My client reserves the right to pursue further protection if this behavior escalates." My client. Protection. As if I were some kind of threat. I sat on the kitchen floor holding that letter for almost an hour, unable to cry, unable to move, just reading the words over and over, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. But it was, and something about it reeked of strategy. Because here's the thing, if they really wanted to cut ties with me, they could have just ignored me, blocked me, let time do the rest. But they didn't. They went legal. That meant they were preparing for something. They were laying groundwork, building a case, rewriting the narrative. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about getting rid of me, it was about framing me. I pulled up my phone and went back to the Venmo message. It was still gone. I screenshotted my bank records showing the alert, time-stamped, from her account to mine. I started organizing the emails, the checklist, the deleted files. I backed everything up to an encrypted drive. If they wanted a war, I wasn't going in unarmed, but I wasn't going to fight dirty either. I still didn't know why this was happening, and some part of me, God help me, still thought maybe my daughter didn't fully understand what she was doing. Maybe she was being manipulated. So instead of reacting, I did the one thing they probably weren't expecting. I disappeared, digitally at least. I stopped calling. I stopped showing up. I deactivated my Facebook. I locked down every account I had and put a credit freeze on my name, just in case. Then I went silent. Not because I was scared, because I wanted to see what they'd do when I stopped playing the role they'd written for me. And sure enough, 3 days later, I got a text. From a number I didn't recognize. One line, "Are you going to make this harder than it has to be?" No name, no context. But I knew exactly who it was from. And now I was sure. This wasn't about custody. This wasn't about distance. This was about something much, much bigger, and someone was lying. I stared at the text for a long time. "Are you going to make this harder than it has to be?" No greeting, no signature, just pressure, meant to intimidate. And I felt it. In my chest, in my hands, in the part of my brain that still couldn't process how the people I loved had flipped the script on me so fast I barely recognized the plot. I didn't respond. I wasn't stupid. Whatever game they were playing, I wasn't going to hand them my reactions. Not anymore. Instead, I forwarded the message to a friend of mine who works in cybersecurity. He'd helped me once before when I thought my email had been hacked, and I remembered him saying most texts leave some kind of fingerprint, even if the number's new. He got back to me that evening. "It's a VoIP number," he said, "routed through a masked service, but whoever it is, they slipped. There'd been one location ping, just one, right before the message was sent. A town 2 hours north, Camber Falls. It was barely a dot on the map, but that name, it lit something up in the back of my brain. I'd heard it before, so I pulled out the old documents from our divorce, the ones I'd shoved in a drawer and promised I'd never look at again, flipped through property logs, travel receipts, legal notices, and there it was. Camber Falls. A cabin, registered under a trust name, one I didn't recognize at the time. Lyra Holdings. Project Lyra. The lockbox. The burner account, the fake legal trail, it all pointed there. And just like that, something else clicked. My daughter didn't move in with her father. She moved through him. Camber Falls wasn't just some random hiding place. It was where they were staging something. A reset, a reinvention, or maybe a replacement. I didn't sleep that night. My mind kept racing, playing and replaying every possible scenario. What were they doing out there? What could possibly be big enough, dangerous enough, that they'd need to cut me out completely, block their own family, weaponize the law, and hide under corporate names? And more than that, who else knew? Because people don't just fall off the map unless someone helps them do it. The next morning, I made a choice. I called the county clerk's office in Camber Falls, pretending to be a buyer interested in rural land near the lake, asked if Lyra Holdings owned anything out there, said I wanted to reach out and make an offer. The woman on the phone was older, polite. She said they hadn't had any recent listings from that group, but yes, she did see a small property under the Lyra Trust. 1-bedroom cabin, registered just under a year ago, not listed for sale. Then she asked something that made my stomach twist. "Are you calling about the new filing too? The one with the name change?" I froze. "What name change?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She flipped through something. I heard paper rustling. Then she said, "Oh yeah, just a few days ago. New identity on file. Different last name. Looks like someone's officially starting over." I thanked her, hung up, and sat completely still. New identity, name change, starting over. This wasn't just secrecy anymore, it was erasure. And the worst part? It wasn't my ex's name on the file. It was hers, my daughter. I spent the rest of the day trying to convince myself I'd misunderstood, that maybe it was a clerical error. Maybe the woman at the county office had been mistaken. Maybe my daughter was registering a business, not changing her identity. But that quiet voice in the back of my head, the one I'd been trying to ignore since the first Venmo message, wouldn't shut up. She's not who she used to be, and maybe she never was. I started digging through old records again, this time not as a mother, as a stranger, like I was investigating someone. I pulled her college records, her old resumes, volunteer work, job application. I even looked through a storage box in the basement labeled school. It was full of little things, report cards, essays, art projects, and buried in the bottom, under a pile of worn manila folders, was a thin black notebook I'd never seen before. No name on the cover, no dates, just page after page of my daughter's handwriting, tight, neat, meticulous. It wasn't a diary, it was more like a manifesto. Every page was a plan, detailed ideas about how to disconnect from people, notes about influence, trust, perception, even a section called narrative control, bullet points on how to redirect conversations, how to make someone feel like they're the one losing touch. I flipped through faster, my heart racing. She had quotes copied from psychology books, even transcripts from manipulation tactics used in cults, copied word for word. Notes about how reinvention begins with isolation and emotional distance is the first weapon. It didn't feel like she'd written these to study them. It felt like she was learning how to use them. I wanted to believe it was just a phase, some edgy college, but that voice inside me, quiet but clear, kept whispering, "This has been building for years." It wasn't just about hiding, it was about controlling everything. The next morning, I got an email from a name I didn't recognize. No subject line, just a file attachment, no message. I hesitated to open it, but I scanned it with virus protect. Clean. The file name was Lena 3.0. Lena is my daughter's. The document was 24 pages long. The first 10 were a list of goals, financial, legal, social, each one tied to a timeline, each one categorized or phase progression. And the final section? It was labeled exit strategy, maternal variable, that's what they were called, a variable. There were notes beneath it, emotional liability, unpredictable pattern reframe as unstable to preserve control. If contact persists, trigger external authority. Maintain narrative, protectiveness, concern, self-sufficiency. They were turning me into the villain of her story. Strategically, deliberately. I scrolled to the final page. It was a flowchart. The last line read, "Once trust circle is closed, initiate legal and financial independence, cut ties, reset identity, proceed." She wasn't just leaving. She was erasing herself, and she'd been planning it for years. With him. My ex-husband might have been the one who showed her how to disappear, but she was the one perfecting. And now, I wasn't even sure if the girl I raised was still in there. For 2 days, I didn't leave the house. I sat with that file, Lena 3.0, open on my laptop like it was staring back at me, daring me to question what I'd seen. Every line was so calculated, so cold, it was hard to believe my daughter had written it, but I recognized the writing. I recognized the patterns. She hadn't just learned how to disconnect from people, she'd practiced it, perfected it, and somehow, I'd been the test subject. I kept thinking back to small things, too small to seem important at the time. Little moments from the past 2 years. How she stopped confiding in me, how her hugs grew shorter, how she changed the passwords on her devices, for security, she said. How she started calling her father by his first name instead of Dad, like they were business partners. She'd been rehearsing this life for a long time, and I'd been too sentimental to see it. But now, I was done being sentimental. I was going to Camber Falls, not to plead, not to beg her to come home. I wasn't even sure what I'd do but I knew this. If my daughter was starting a new life built on lies and manipulation, then I deserved to see it with my... Took the back road. No music, no distraction. Just me, my thoughts, and the weight of 22 years unraveling in silence. When I reached the edge of Camber Falls, it was exactly what I expected. Quiet, off-grid, the kind of place where people go when they don't want to be found. I'd brought the documents, the notebook, everything. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew what I was going to find. The truth. The address from the property records took me to a cabin tucked behind a half-mile of dirt road and tall trees. It looked empty, peaceful, the kind of place you'd retreat to if you wanted the world to forget you existed. I parked far enough away that they wouldn't hear the car, walked the rest of the way on foot, and then I saw her, through the window. Not Lena, me, or someone trying to be me. There was a large framed photo on the wall, our wall, one I hadn't seen in years. Me holding Lena at age 6, both of us laughing. It had been edited. My ex was cut out of it entirely. Everything in the cabin looked staged. Familiar books, the same brand of tea I used to drink, a sweater I thought I'd lost years ago hanging by the door. It was like someone had recreated my home, without me in it, and there she was, Lena, moving through the space like she belonged there, not just living in it, owning it. Then I saw something that froze me where I stood. She picked up a tablet, opened a document, and began reading aloud. My voice, my words, my journal. She'd copied pages of it, maybe from the time she lived with, word for word, practicing the cadence, the tone, like she was studying for a role. And then it hit me. She wasn't just reinventing herself, she was becoming me, rewriting my story, taking my place. Only now I wasn't part of it. I wasn't just erased. I was replaced. And whatever this wasn't about escape anymore. This was about possession. I should have left. Every instinct told me to walk away, call the police, tell someone, anyone, what I'd seen. But logic doesn't stand a chance when you're watching your own life being puppeteered behind a glass window. I circled the back of the cabin. No alarms, no cameras. They didn't need them out here. Camber Falls was isolation by design, a place where people go to disappear, and no one asks why. There was a side entrance, slightly cracked, like it hadn't latched properly. I stepped inside. The first thing I noticed was the smell, lavender and sandalwood, my scent, the one I used to wear every day until Lena teased me for being stuck in the past. Now it filled the entire house, thick and intentional. The living room was a near replica of my old one. Same books on the shelf, same faded rug with the coffee stain from when Lena was 10, except I'd thrown that rug out years ago. How had they recreated all this? I didn't hear anyone, no voices, no footsteps, just the sound of the wind through the trees and the distant hum of the heater. I walked carefully down the hall, every nerve on fire. There were 3 doors. One was clearly a bathroom. One was a bedroom, neatly made, with clothing that mirrored mine folded in the drawers. And then, the 3rd door. It didn't fit. It was newer than the others, reinforced, thick, out of place, locked, of course. But as I stood there staring at it, I realized something. My blood run. That door? It wasn't on the original floor plan of the property. I tried the knob. Nothing. But just as I turned to leave, I heard something the other side. A scrape. A slow, dragging sound, like someone moving across the floor. And a thump. Then silence. I backed away, heart pounding, mouth dry, and just as I reached the end of the hall, faint, muffled, she's not supposed to be. I bolted down the hallway, out the trees. I ran so fast I couldn't feel my legs, couldn't think. I didn't stop until I reached the car and locked the doors. I sat there for minutes, maybe longer, shaking. That voice didn't belong to me. It didn't sound like anyone I knew. And whoever he wasn't just behind that door. He was part of whatever this was. And now I was sure. This wasn't just about identity theft. It wasn't just about isolation. It was about something else entirely. And whatever they were doing in that cabin, it wasn't just personal anymore. It was dangerous. I didn't go home. I couldn't. I drove straight to a hotel 2 towns over and paid in cash. My hands were still shaking when I handed over my ID, and the woman at the desk looked at me like she wanted to ask if I was okay. But she didn't. The door in that cabin wasn't just a locked room. It was a boundary, a line between everything I thought I knew and the reality I had no part in. I didn't sleep. I lay awake all night replaying the sound of that man's voice. She's not supposed to be here. I wasn't supposed to be there, because I wasn't meant to know any of it. In the morning, I contacted a private investigator, someone I knew from years back when we were looking into my ex's financial behavior during the divorce. I didn't tell him everything, just enough. I said I believed my daughter was involved in something manipulative, maybe criminal. I needed to know who was behind Lyra Holdings, who owned that cabin, who that man was. He agreed to look into it, and what he found broke everything wide open. Lyra Holdings wasn't just a trust. It was a shell company, set up under an LLC out of Nevada. Clean, untraceable, unless you knew where to look. But someone had made a mistake. The LLC was originally registered by a man named Derek Hale. That name meant nothing, until the investigator sent over a photo. Derek Hale was the man behind the door, but here's the thing. He wasn't just some investor. He wasn't some criminal mastermind. He was a psychologist, specializing in behavioral conditioning and identity. He'd lost his license 3 years ago after being caught running unapproved experiments in private facilities, ones where patients were isolated, manipulated, sometimes convinced to believe they were someone else. And guess who helped finance his original clinic? My ex-husband. That's when it all made sense. Project Lyra wasn't about disappearing. It was about reconstruction. They weren't just helping Lena escape her life. They were helping her erase it, piece by piece. They'd created a scenario where I would be seen as unstable, erratic, obsessed. They used my love, my concern, as the evidence to cast me as the threat. And with my daughter vulnerable, disillusioned, emotionally raw from the divorce, she was the perfect subject. Except there was one thing they didn't account for. I didn't give up. I had the file, the notebook, the email, the recording of that voice, all of it. I turned it over to a lawyer, then to the authorities. It took weeks, but it moved fast after that. Derek Hale was placed under federal investigation. The cabin was searched, and what they found in that locked room. I don't think I'll ever be able to talk about it fully, but I will say this. My daughter wasn't living in that cabin. She was being conditioned in it, monitored, recorded, prompted, slowly distanced from her memories, her relationships, even her own name. They were replacing her identity with a version that could be molded, controlled. She's safe now. She's no longer in their hands. She doesn't live with me yet, but we speak every day. It's cautious, slow, like learning to walk again on unfamiliar ground. She doesn't remember writing some of the things I found. She says parts of her life feel foggy, like someone else lived them. But she cries when I read her old journal entries. She says she can feel the truth somewhere inside, even if she can't touch it yet. We're rebuilding, not back to where we were, but somewhere new. Together. She's keeping her legal name for... But she told me something last week that made me finally exhale. I don't want to be Lena 3.0 anymore. I asked her what she wanted to be instead. She smiled. Just Lena. That's enough. And for the first time in a long time, I believed her. Because now, she remembers who she is. And more importantly, who she's not.